The early morning rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the windows of Tyler's cafe like an impatient visitor. Inside, Tyler Brooks moved around the empty space, wiping down the wooden counters and setting up for the day ahead. It was still early, 2 hours before opening, but Tyler always arrived before sunrise to prepare. Owning a small cafe in the heart of the city had always been his dream, but lately, it felt more like a battle. The weight of overdue bills, slow business, and a growing pile of debt had turned every morning into a fight for survival. He sighed and glanced at the old clock hanging on the wall. Still too early for customers, he thought. The streets outside were nearly empty, the only movement coming from raindrops sliding down the foggy windows. Just as he turned to start brewing the first pot of coffee, something outside caught his eye. A man stood on the sidewalk, hunched against the downpour. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. His shoes were falling apart, barely holding together against the cold, wet pavement. He looked hesitant, as if debating whether to step forward or walk away. Then, slowly, the man approached the cafe door and knocked, softly, hesitantly. Tyler paused. The cafe was still closed. He could pretend he didn't hear it, keep preparing for the day ahead. But something about the stranger, the way he shivered, the exhaustion in his posture, made Tyler hesitate. With a sigh, he grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and walked toward the door. Tyler unlocked the door and pulled it open, letting in the scent of rain and the distant hum of the city waking up. The man took a small step back, as if expecting to be turned away. "We're not open yet," Tyler said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Still got a couple of hours." The man nodded, lowering his gaze to the wet ground. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wondering if you had any food." Tyler studied him for a moment. The man's face was thin, his cheeks hollow. He looked like he hadn't had a proper meal in days. Technically, Tyler didn't have to do anything. The cafe was closed, and he had enough on his plate already. But something inside him wouldn't let him turn the man away. "What do you want?" Tyler asked, leaning against the doorframe. The man blinked, surprised. Then, for the first time, he looked Tyler in the eye and said, "Anything. Just, anything you can spare." Tyler exhaled, then stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "Let's get you something warm." The man hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, dripping water onto the floor. Tyler shut the door behind him, already thinking about what he could make. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around the stranger the moment he stepped inside, a stark contrast to the cold rain that had soaked through his clothes. He stood there awkwardly, as if afraid to move too far in, his wet shoes leaving faint prints on the tiled floor. Tyler glanced at the man, noticing the way his hands trembled slightly, whether from hunger or cold, he couldn't tell. Without a word, he walked behind the counter, grabbed the clean towel he had brought earlier, and handed it over. "Here, dry off a little," Tyler said, before turning toward the kitchen. The man took the towel hesitantly, giving a small nod of gratitude before wiping his face and hands. He watched as Tyler moved around, opening cupboards, pulling out ingredients, and lighting up the stove. "You don't have to do this," the man murmured, his voice quiet but sincere. "I know," Tyler replied, cracking a few eggs into a pan. "But I am." The cafe owner worked quickly, preparing a simple but hearty breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and a side of crispy potatoes left over from yesterday's batch. He wasn't sure the last time the man had eaten, so he made sure the plate was full. A few minutes later, Tyler placed the steaming plate on a small table near the window and gestured for the man to sit. "Eat up," he said, crossing his arms. The man hesitated for only a second before pulling out the chair and sitting down. He picked up the fork and took a slow bite, as if savoring the warmth of the food. Then, unable to hold back any longer, he ate faster, clearing half the plate in a matter of minutes. Tyler sat across from him, sipping his coffee and watching. What's your name? He asked. The man swallowed a bite of toast before answering. Daniel. Tyler nodded. Been out there long? Daniel glanced at the rain outside, his expression unreadable. Long enough. Tyler didn't press. He knew that sometimes, people didn't want to tell their whole story right away. Instead, he let the silence sit comfortably between them as Daniel finished the rest of his meal. When the plate was empty, Daniel set down his fork and let out a quiet breath. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I mean it. Tyler simply nodded. No problem. Daniel wiped his hands on the napkin, then reached into his pocket. I don't have much, he started, fumbling for something. Tyler shook his head. Don't worry about it. But then Daniel pulled out something Tyler didn't expect. A small, folded envelope. He set it gently on the table and pushed it toward him. What's this? Tyler asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel met his gaze. A thank you. Tyler hesitated before picking up the envelope. It felt oddly heavy in his hands. He unfolded it carefully. And his breath caught. Inside, neatly stacked, was a pile of crisp $100 bills. A lot of them. Tyler stared, unable to speak. He quickly counted in his head. $10,000. His heart pounded in his chest. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel simply smiled. Something I've been holding on to for a long time, he said. And now, I think it's time it goes to someone who deserves it. Tyler stared at the stack of bills as if they might disappear at any moment. His fingers gripped the envelope tightly, his mind racing. $10,000, he finally managed, looking up at Daniel with disbelief. I don't understand. Where did you get this? Daniel leaned back in his chair, his tired eyes filled with something unreadable, something between nostalgia and relief. Let's just say it's money I didn't earn the right way, he said quietly. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with it. Didn't think I deserved to keep it. Tyler's brows furrowed. And now you're just giving it away. Daniel nodded. To you. Tyler let out a breath, shaking his head. I can't take this. I just gave you a meal, it wasn't anything special. You don't owe me anything. Daniel chuckled softly, tapping his fingers against the table. It wasn't about the food, Tyler. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was about the fact that you didn't turn me away. You could have ignored me. Could have told me to leave because the café was closed. But you didn't. You chose kindness over convenience. Tyler swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, to tell Daniel that he didn't need a reward for doing the right thing. But deep down, he knew how much this money could change things. His debts. His struggling business. His future. Still, a part of him hesitated. Daniel must have noticed because he sighed, leaning forward slightly. Look, I've spent years making bad choices. Hurting people, taking shortcuts, thinking only about myself. And then one day, I woke up and realized I had nothing, not even my own dignity. His fingers traced the rim of his empty coffee cup. I've been trying to fix that ever since. Tyler listened, his grip on the envelope loosening just a bit. Daniel met his gaze, his expression serious. You helped me today. Not just with food, but with simple kindness. Let me help you, too. Tyler looked at the envelope again. The weight of it wasn't just in the money, it was in what it represented. A second chance. A turning point. Finally, he let out a slow breath and nodded. All right, he said, his voice steady. I'll use it well. Daniel smiled. I know you will. Outside, the rain began to ease, the storm passing as the first hints of morning light broke through the clouds. Tyler sat at the table long after Daniel had left, the envelope still in his hands. The rain outside had softened into a light drizzle, tapping gently against the cafe window, but inside, Tyler's thoughts were a storm of their own. $10,000. It was more money than he had seen in a long time. Enough to pay off his overdue loans, catch up on rent, and even make some much-needed improvements to the cafe. But something about the situation still felt surreal. He glanced at the door, half expecting Daniel to come back and take it all away, as if this were some kind of test or elaborate joke. But he knew it wasn't. Daniel had meant every word. Tyler exhaled and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. He had spent the last few months drowning in stress, constantly worrying about how to keep his business afloat. And just like that, a stranger had walked in and handed him a lifeline. But what if it wasn't just luck? He thought back to that moment, the knock on the door, the hesitation he had felt before opening it. He could have ignored it. He could have turned Daniel away, told him the cafe was closed, and gone on with his morning. But he hadn't. He had chosen kindness without expecting anything in return. And now, that simple choice had changed everything. Tyler tightened his grip on the envelope, determination settling in his chest. I won't waste this opportunity. He stood up, grabbed his phone, and dialed the bank. Hi, this is Tyler Brooks, he said when someone answered. I'd like to make a payment on my loan. As he spoke, a sense of relief washed over him. For the first time in a long time, the weight on his shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. Tyler stood behind the cafe counter, his fingers drumming against the surface as he listened to the automated voice on the other end of the phone. When a real person finally picked up, he straightened his posture, his grip tightening around the envelope in his hand. Hi, this is Tyler Brooks. I'd like to make a payment on my loan, he repeated. There was a pause on the other end before the banker responded. All right, Mr. Brooks. Let me pull up your account. Tyler exhaled, glancing around the quiet cafe. It was still early, his usual customers wouldn't start coming in for another hour, but everything suddenly felt different. For months, he had been dodging calls from this same bank, pushing back deadlines, scraping together whatever he could to keep the cafe open. Every time he had picked up the phone before, it had been out of desperation, negotiating for more time, more leniency. But today was different. Today, he was here to pay them back. Okay, I see your account, the banker said. You have an outstanding balance of. I want to pay all of it, Tyler interrupted, his voice steady. There was a brief silence on the other end. You want to pay the full amount today? Yes, Tyler confirmed. Every last cent. The banker hesitated, as if trying to process the sudden change. All right, we can process that now. How would you like to make the payment? Tyler glanced at the money in his hand and smiled slightly. Cash. 15 minutes later, after finalizing the details, Tyler ended the call and let out a deep breath. It was done. The weight of that loan, something that had haunted him for so long, was finally gone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't drowning anymore. He looked down at the remaining money in the envelope. Even after paying the bank, he still had enough left to make real improvements to the cafe, new equipment, better ingredients, maybe even a fresh coat of paint to bring life back into the place. For years, he had worked tirelessly to keep his dream alive. And now, thanks to a single act of kindness, he had a real shot at making that dream flourish. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a grin creeping onto his face. This was only the beginning. The day felt different. Lighter. As Tyler stepped out of the bank, the drizzle had completely stopped, and the sun was beginning to break through the heavy gray clouds. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel weighed down. The debt was gone. He could finally breathe again. The crisp bills that remained in the envelope felt like possibility in his hands. With the cafe no longer drowning in overdue payments, he could finally think about the future. What now? By the time he made it back to the café, the streets were waking up. Shop owners were flipping their signs to "open," the smell of fresh pastries and brewing coffee filling the air. It was a feeling he had always loved, morning in the city, where anything seemed possible. Unlocking the door to his café, he stepped inside and took a deep breath. This place had been his dream for so long, but lately, it had felt more like a burden. Now, it was a blank slate. He could finally start making the improvements he had always wanted. Tyler sat down at a corner table, grabbed a notebook, and flipped to a fresh page. Cafe upgrades. Fix the espresso machine, the old one sputtered and groaned every morning. A new one would make service smoother. Upgrade the menu, new ingredients, better recipes. People deserved good coffee and good food. Marketing, he had never had the budget to properly advertise. Maybe flyers. Social media. Refurnished the seating area, his chairs were wobbly, and the paint was peeling. It was time for a refresh. He tapped the pen against his chin, smiling to himself. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just trying to survive, he was planning for something better. Then, a soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. The cafe wasn't open yet, but when he looked up, he saw a familiar face. Daniel. Tyler stood and walked over, unlocking the door. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said, stepping aside so Daniel could enter. Daniel gave a small, knowing smile. "I wanted to check in. See what you decided to do with it." Tyler gestured toward the notebook on the table. "I'm making a plan. I used part of it to clear my debt. The rest. I'm going to make this place into what I always imagined it could be." Daniel's eyes flickered with something like pride. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what I hoped for." Tyler studied him for a moment. There was still so much he didn't know about this man, where he came from, why he had carried that money for so long, or what had led him to that rainy morning in front of the cafe. "You never told me why you chose me," Tyler said. Daniel chuckled, looking out the window. "Because I used to be you." Tyler frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel's gaze was distant, like he was remembering something long buried. "I had a business once. A small one. I struggled, just like you. But instead of holding on to my dream, I made mistakes. I took shortcuts. I let the wrong people into my life." He exhaled. "And eventually, I lost everything." Tyler listened in silence, sensing there was more. Daniel turned back to him. "I can't change my past, but I can help someone who reminds me of the man I used to be, the man I should have been." The weight of those words settled between them. Tyler nodded slowly. "Well. I won't waste it." Daniel smiled. "I know you won't." With that, he gave a small nod and turned toward the door. "Wait," Tyler said. "Will I see you again?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before shrugging. "Maybe." Then, without another word, he stepped outside and disappeared down the street. Tyler watched him go, a strange sense of gratitude filling his chest. Daniel had given him more than just money, he had given him a second chance. And he wasn't going to waste it. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Tyler flipped the sign to "open." For the first time in months, he felt truly excited about the day ahead. His mind buzzed with plans, fixing up the place, upgrading the menu, maybe even hiring an extra set of hands to help during rush hours. But first, he needed to take action. Between serving customers that morning, Tyler made a few phone calls. The first was to an equipment supplier. He ordered a brand new espresso machine, the kind that didn't sputter or leak whenever he made a latte. The second was to a local carpenter, inquiring about fixing the cafe's old wooden tables and chairs. By noon, his to-do list was packed, but for once, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt hopeful. The lunchtime crowd trickled in, regulars greeting him warmly as they took their usual seats. An elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harding, sat by the window, enjoying their black coffee and pastries. A young writer hunched over his laptop in the corner, typing away between sips of cappuccino. These were the people who had kept him going even in the toughest times, and now he could finally give back. As he was wiping down the counter, the door swung open again, and a familiar face stepped inside. Tyler. It was Megan, his oldest friend and occasional business consultant, though she mostly offered her advice over free coffee. "You look different," she said, narrowing her eyes playfully as she slid onto a bar stool. "Did you finally get a full night's sleep or something?" Tyler chuckled. "Something like that." Megan leaned forward, lowering her voice. "So, what's the deal? You were panicking about bills last week, and now you're all smiles. Did you rob a bank?" Tyler smirked, shaking his head. "Nope. Just a bit of good karma coming back to me." Megan raised an eyebrow. "You're gonna have to be more specific than that." So, he told her. About Daniel, the unexpected gift, and the weight that had been lifted from his shoulders. By the time he finished, Megan was staring at him in disbelief. "You're telling me a stranger handed you $10,000 after you gave him breakfast?" "Yep. And you took it?" Tyler hesitated. "At first, no. But he insisted. Said he wanted to help." Megan shook her head, laughing. "That's insane. Stuff like that doesn't happen in real life." Tyler leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I thought the same thing. But maybe it does. Maybe we just don't notice when kindness comes full circle." Megan studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, however it happened, I'm glad. You deserve a win." Tyler smiled. "Yeah. I think so too." For the first time in a long time, he truly believed it. The next few days flew by in a blur of renovations, deliveries, and long hours. Tyler poured himself into improving the café, determined to make the most of Daniel's gift. The first major change was the espresso machine. The old, sputtering model was replaced with a sleek, high-end one that brewed the smoothest coffee Tyler had ever tasted. The difference was immediate, customers noticed, complimenting him on the richer flavors. Then came the furniture. The carpenter arrived early one morning, measuring the wobbly tables and chairs, promising to reinforce and restore them to their former charm. Tyler had considered buying brand new ones, but he liked the idea of preserving what had always been part of the café. It felt like a way to honor its history while moving forward. He also revamped the menu, adding new pastries and sandwiches, made with higher quality ingredients. It was a risk, better ingredients meant higher costs, but Tyler had faith. If he gave people something worth coming back for, they'd keep coming back. Megan dropped by every day to check on his progress. "You're like a different person," she teased one afternoon, sipping on a perfectly brewed latte. "A month ago, you were convinced this place was going under. Now you're acting like a business tycoon." Tyler grinned, wiping down the counter. "I finally realized something." "Oh." She raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" He leaned against the counter, looking around at the café, at the freshly painted walls, the upgraded equipment, the customers who lingered longer now, enjoying the space. This café was never failing. I just wasn't giving it my all. I was so busy worrying about what I didn't have, I forgot to focus on what I could build. Megan smiled. "And now?" Tyler took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Now, I'm all in." She clinked her coffee cup against his. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Tyler echoed, and for the first time in a long time, he believed in the future he was creating. A week after the café's quiet transformation began, Tyler started noticing something different. More customers were coming in, not just as regulars, but new faces, people who had never set foot in Tyler's café before. At first, he thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the updated menu had drawn a little extra attention. But then, during a particularly busy morning rush, he overheard two customers chatting at a table near the counter. "I heard about this place from a friend," one of them said, stirring his cappuccino. "She said the owner's been turning things around lately." "Yeah, I saw something about it online," the other replied. "People are talking about how it's this hidden gem in the city. And the coffee's actually amazing." Tyler almost dropped the tray of pastries he was carrying. People were talking about his café. Later that afternoon, after the rush had settled, he grabbed his phone and searched the café's name. To his shock, there were several new reviews, glowing ones. "A warm, welcoming little spot. The coffee has never been better, and the owner clearly puts his heart into it. Highly recommend. Stumbled upon this place after hearing about it from a friend. Amazing atmosphere, great food, and a real sense of community." Even Megan had left a cheeky review. "If you want the best latte in town and a side of inspiration, this is your spot. Tell Tyler I sent you. He owes me free coffee." Tyler shook his head, grinning. The cafe was finally getting the recognition it deserved. He had spent so much time worrying about failure that he had forgotten something important: success didn't always come in grand, sweeping moments. Sometimes, it came quietly, in small steps, a kind gesture, a meal given freely, a stranger's unexpected gift. And now, all of it was coming full circle. The cafe was thriving. And for the first time, Tyler knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. The cafe was livelier than ever. The hum of conversation mixed with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and every table was occupied. Tyler barely had a moment to breathe as he moved behind the counter, steaming milk, pouring espresso shots, and serving up pastries with a smile. It was exactly the kind of energy he had always dreamed of for Tyler's cafe. As he handed a cappuccino to a customer, the bell above the door jingled. Tyler glanced up automatically, and froze. Daniel. The man who had changed everything. He stood at the entrance, dressed the same as before, worn clothes, tired eyes, but there was something different about him this time. He didn't look as weary. Instead, there was a quiet sense of peace in his expression. Tyler wiped his hands on a towel and stepped out from behind the counter. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said, echoing the words from their last meeting. Daniel gave a small smile. "Thought I'd drop by. See how things turned out." Tyler gestured around the busy cafe. "See for yourself. Business is booming." Daniel looked around, nodding approvingly. "You did good, Tyler." Tyler hesitated before speaking. "I never got to thank you properly," he said. "Not just for the money, but for believing in me. I don't know where I'd be right now if you hadn't walked through that door." Daniel's gaze softened. "I think you would have figured it out eventually." Tyler chuckled. "Maybe. But you gave me a head start." Daniel took a slow breath, then reached into his pocket. For a brief moment, Tyler thought he was about to pull out another envelope, but instead, Daniel retrieved something much smaller, a single folded piece of paper. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward Tyler. "What's this?" Tyler asked, eyeing it curiously. Daniel smirked. "Call it the final part of the lesson." Tyler hesitated, then picked up the note and unfolded it. Inside, in small, neat handwriting, were just 5 words. "Now, it's your turn." Tyler looked up, confused. "What does this mean?" Daniel stepped back, hands in his pockets. "You'll know when the time comes." And with that, he turned and walked out the door. Tyler wanted to call after him, ask him to explain, but something told him Daniel had already given him all the answers he needed. He stared at the note for a long moment before tucking it safely into his pocket. Whatever Daniel meant, Tyler had a feeling he'd understand soon enough. Daniel's words lingered in Tyler's mind long after he had left. "Now, it's your turn." At first, Tyler wasn't sure what to do with that message. Was it a challenge? A reminder? A call to action? Over the next few weeks, as the cafe continued to thrive, the words kept resurfacing. Tyler had always believed in kindness, but Daniel had shown him just how powerful one act of generosity could be. And then, one chilly evening, the opportunity to pay it forward arrived. The stranger at the door. It was nearly closing time. The cafe had emptied out except for one last customer finishing his tea in the corner. Tyler was wiping down tables when he heard a soft knock at the door. At first, he thought it was a late customer, but when he turned, he saw someone standing outside, a young woman, bundled in a thin, tattered coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She looked hesitant, the same way Daniel had that rainy morning. Tyler didn't hesitate this time. He walked over and opened the door. "Hey there. Can I help you?" The woman looked down, biting her lip. I know you're closing. I was wondering if you had anything left over." She swallowed hard. "I can't pay, but Come inside," Tyler said immediately. The woman's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded and stepped in, shivering from the cold. Tyler grabbed a clean towel and handed it to her, just as he had with Daniel. Then, without asking any questions, he walked behind the counter and started preparing a warm meal, a fresh sandwich, a hot bowl of soup, and a cup of tea. As the woman sat down, she looked around at the cozy cafe, taking in the smell of fresh bread and coffee. "This place is really nice," she murmured. Tyler smiled. "It wasn't always like this." She looked up at him, curious. "What changed?" Tyler placed the food in front of her and thought for a moment. Then, he simply said, "Someone helped me when I needed it most." The woman hesitated before picking up the spoon. "And now you're helping me." Tyler nodded. "That's how it works." As she ate, Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out the note Daniel had given him that day. He unfolded it, reading the 5 simple words again. "Now, it's your turn." Smiling to himself, Tyler took a pen from behind the counter, flipped the note over, and wrote something on the back. When the woman finished her meal, she wiped her hands on a napkin and looked at Tyler. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay you." Tyler slid the folded note across the table. "You don't have to. But when you can, pass this on." The woman picked up the note, her brow furrowed in confusion. She unfolded it and read what he had written. "When the time comes, pay it forward." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I will." Tyler nodded, knowing she meant it. And just like that, the cycle continued. Tyler watched as the young woman carefully tucked the note into her pocket. Something about the moment felt significant, like he was witnessing the start of something bigger than himself. She stood, still holding the now empty cup of tea between her hands as if savoring the last bit of warmth. "I never expected someone to just help like this," she admitted. Tyler leaned against the counter. "Neither did I, once." She gave him a small, grateful smile before tightening her coat around herself. "I should go," she said. "But I won't forget this." Tyler nodded. "Take care." As she stepped out into the cold night, he watched her disappear down the street, the note still safely tucked in her hand. A new purpose. That night, as Tyler locked up, he thought about how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, he had been drowning in debt, barely holding on to his dream. Then Daniel had walked in, changed everything, and left him with a single message, one that Tyler had just passed on. But something told him this was only the beginning. Helping that woman had sparked something inside him. What if I can do more? His cafe had always been about good coffee in a welcoming atmosphere, but what if it could also be a place where kindness thrived? A place where people weren't just served meals but given second chances, just like he had been. The thought stuck with him as he fell asleep that night, ideas forming in his mind. By morning, he knew exactly what he wanted to do next. It's time to turn this cafe into something more. The next morning, Tyler woke up with a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. He had always wanted Tyler's cafe to be more than just a business, he wanted it to be a place that meant something. And now, he had a way to make that happen. Over breakfast, he scribbled down ideas in his notebook. Community First was the title he wrote at the top. Pay It Forward Board, a spot in the cafe where customers could buy an extra coffee or meal for someone in need. Job Training Program, a way to offer part-time work and skills training to those struggling to find employment. A monthly free meal night, no questions asked, anyone who needed food could come in and have a warm meal. The more he wrote, the more excited he became. That afternoon, Megan stopped by as usual, immediately noticing the determined look on his face. "All right," she said, pulling off her scarf. "You're up to something." Tyler grinned. "I have an idea." As he explained his vision, Megan's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration. "You're serious about this?" she asked when he finished. "Completely," Tyler said. "I was given a second chance. Why not give that to others?" Megan leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know, for a guy who was drowning in debt a few weeks ago, you've come a long way." Tyler chuckled. "Yeah, guess I have." She smirked. "So, when do we start?" Tyler felt a rush of gratitude. Megan had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. "Tomorrow," he said. "I want this to happen now." Megan nodded. "Then let's do it." The cafe was about to become something more than a business. It was about to become a place where kindness had a home. The next morning, Tyler arrived at the cafe before sunrise, his heart racing with anticipation. Today marked the start of something new, not just for his business, but for the people who would walk through its doors. With Megan's help, he set up a Pay It Forward board near the counter. A simple wooden frame with small paper slips pinned to it, each one representing a prepaid coffee or meal that someone in need could claim. At the top, he wrote in bold letters. "Take what you need. Give what you can." By mid-morning, the cafe was buzzing as usual, but something felt different. Tyler watched as a regular, Mr. Harding, approached the board, read the sign, and without hesitation, pulled out his wallet. He handed Tyler a $20 bill. "Put this toward a few meals," he said with a kind smile. A few minutes later, a young woman, one of the new customers drawn in by the recent buzz, pinned a slip to the board after paying for her coffee. Tyler felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The ripple effect had begun. Then, just before noon, the door opened, and a familiar figure hesitated in the doorway. It was the young woman from the other night, the one Tyler had given a free meal. She glanced around, nervous, then her eyes landed on the board. Slowly, she walked over, read the slips, and then, as if unsure, reached out for one. Tyler stepped forward, giving her an encouraging nod. "Go ahead," he said softly. She took a slip labeled, "One hot meal," her hands trembling slightly. When she looked up at him, her eyes shone with something between gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. Tyler smiled. "Anytime." As she sat down to eat, Megan nudged him playfully. "Told you this was a good idea." Tyler exhaled, looking around at the cafe, his cafe. It was no longer just a business. It was a place of kindness, of second chances, of community. And as he stood there, watching strangers helping strangers, he realized something. Success hadn't just come to him because of luck. It had come because of one simple truth. When you do good, good always finds its way back to you. And in that moment, Tyler knew, this was only the beginning.